Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk, a new kind of podcast where no topic is off limits. We're bringing in experts and owners to have the conversations we should be having as a dog community. Each week, a new guest will share firsthand experiences, educational resources, or professional guidance to help you learn and grow along with your dog. You won't get one perspective here, you'll get them all, because every dog is different and every owner is too.
You can follow along on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Straight Up Dog Talk, or by visiting www.straightupdogtalk.com. Tune in from any of your favorite podcast platforms.
Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk. I'm Em, and we're back again this week with Josh.
Hello, still here.
And unfortunately, this is our first episode that I'm going to give a trigger warning on. This episode is going to contain some very tough topics, including idiopathic aggression and humane euthanasia due to idiopathic aggression. So if you're not ready to listen to this topic at this point in time, hit the pause button and come back to this episode later. With that, I would like to introduce Lana, who's here to talk about her story with her dog Loki and how he came to pass, and her new dog Aries. How are you doing, Lana?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being here and being willing to share this really, really sensitive story with us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, and you can even give a little bit of information about your new dog, Aries, and just kind of give us an overall idea of what life looks like for you guys.
Well, my name's Lana. I'm a mom. I have a teenage son, and we started our journey about 2.5 years ago by adopting a Belgian Malinois puppy, who we brought home and named Loki. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But we have a new Belgian Malinois, and his name is Aries, and he just brings so much joy to our household.
And that is exactly why we have you here tonight. We're here to let you share your story about Loki with the listeners, because this is something that some dog owners experience, but it is something that the dog community as a whole, I don't think, talks about enough. And unfortunately, idiopathic aggression is something that I have also personally dealt with. And I felt so much shame and so much sorrow for so many years due to it that I really wanted to bring your story to light, because I want people to know that this is not their fault. There's nothing to be shameful about, and that educating others is the best way forward to help other people get through this really, really terrible situation. So first, let me start off by defining what idiopathic aggression is. It's sometimes also called rage syndrome. It is diagnosed when there seems to be no reason for aggressive behavior or attacks that are routinely happening. And they're aggressive. When I say aggressive, I'm talking about the dog is attacking people, it's attacking other dogs, blood is being drawn. Not a very good situation at all. So we're going to talk about a dog with some serious bite history here in this episode. So like I said, again, trigger warning. So Lana, let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about why you decided to get a Belgian Malinois, and let's talk about how that journey started for you.
Basically, the journey started with my son when he was younger. Right now, he's in high school. Prior to getting Loki, he always talked about it. He was very passionate and excited about the breed. We did a lot of research over years, and I just felt at that time he wasn't ready to handle the magnitude of the breed. So, freshman year in high school, our household made the decision. We found, by sheer luck, a local breeder. She wasn't too far away. And not that I gave in, but I allowed him to have the opportunity, to get basically his dream dog. When he grows up, he wants to be a canine handler. So I thought at this time he could handle the responsibility. It is an extreme breed. It's not for everyone. It's not for every household. It's not ideal for every teenager. You have to do your research. They're working dogs. They're very inquisitive, very intelligent, and if you don't do your homework and know what you're getting into, they can basically outthink you. We went and met the breeder, and I let him pick out a puppy, so he selected Loki. I didn't think anything was sketchy of the situation at the time. The breeder was very open and honest. She said that the puppies came from working line dogs. The dame was there, but the sire was not. She said that he was away. He was a military working canine. So we purchased the dog and we brought him home. And for the next year, he was trained, loved. He was in sport competitions and everything was great. He was well behaved. He was e-collar trained, prong collar trained, dealt with different trainers. I even started to, watch tutorials and videos to get more understanding so I can, and more. And we thought that we had the perfect dog until about, let's fast forward a year. And we were at a competition, dock diving. The first day he did fantastic. He titled in the competition, and we back the following day. And he just had this severe anxiety out of nowhere. I chalked it up to he was overstimulated. He was not neutered. It was a new environment. I figured let's separate him a little bit for the situation, have a little downtime. His dock diving instructor or trainer told me to put him away in the pen, and we proceeded to walk him over to the pen. Without warning whatsoever, he whipped around and just grabbed hold of my forearm and began to shred it. That, there was blood spewing everywhere, and I was embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to see anything that happened. My son was there, but luckily he didn't witness it. So we just covered it up, threw on a sweatshirt, put bandages on, finished the competition, just chalked it up to the fact that I thought he was overstimulated, and I made a poor decision to enter a second day of competition. Little did I know that that would be the journey and the new norm in my life. He basically, over the course of the next 9 months, developed into a dog that the entire household became afraid of. He would have random outbursts. He would almost look like a different dog during these situations. It could be something as basic as telling him to go into his crate, trying to assist him into the car. He could have been laying on the sofa with us watching television, and one circumstance I got up to go to the bathroom, and I used to call him Mommy's baby, and I would be like, "What's Mommy's baby doing?" All of a sudden, in a split second, he looked like a completely different dog. His eyes were black, his ears were back, lip was snarled, and he just leapt off of the sofa and started to attack me. And this is something that occurred basically every month, 6 weeks religiously over the course of the next 9 months.
So you said that the first time that it ever happened was at this dock diving competition.
Yeah.
And prior to this, Loki had been a very active dock diver. You have several pictures of him during this competitive sport. And we actually even have one up on the website of Loki mid-jump for the retrieve. And you'd never had any inkling of seeing any kind of aggression or reaction or any reactivity towards another dog at all until he bit your arm.
That's correct. He had no reactivity whatsoever. He was just your typical high-strung at times, very obedient, very eager to please, lovable Malinois.
Let's go back again and talk about the difference, because there's a very clear distinction in what you're describing here. And I want to kind of just repeat these because I want the listeners to hear it again a second time, because I want it to really register.
When he would go into these states, he would latch on. There would be deep puncture marks. He would attach himself, and they were violent. There would be blood splatter afterwards. And then he went back to Loki within a minute or so, and he would want to lick me and curl up on my lap and kiss my face. And it just, it wasn't normal.
Now, after these incidents started happening, you said they were happening every 6 weeks like clockwork. Did you reach out to one of the trainers that you worked with, your veterinarian? What were the responses that you got in those episodes?
They were basically negative responses. The trainer that I dealt with on a typical basis that was familiar with the breeder, he just basically acted like he couldn't be bothered. He, in one moment, said, "Those dogs are shit. I'm familiar with them, and you need to make a decision, but I don't think you're going to like the outcome." He never elaborated, gave me any kind of, specifics behind it. I also reached out to the breeder. Every single time I reached out to her, he said, "That's not normal. He needs to be put down." I mean, these are professionals. You would think that they would offer some type of assistance or, have some kind of etiquette to let you know, since they're the professionals, what needs to happen other than, the dog needs to be destroyed.
And this is the point where you got a little bit suspicious about the whole situation because of that trainer's comment about the dogs and the litters and the conditions of these litters from this specific breeder, correct?
Correct. I basically, like an investigator, I went onto her social media and she had given me one name. She told me that the mother's name was Gypsy, and that was what was on Loki's AKC paperwork. So I began to go through her social media, and it appeared to me that something wasn't right because the dog that I met had a collar on and her name was Trauma, and I didn't receive his paperwork, right away. I had to apply for it. So to me, it was, the mother. When I went there, I didn't think anything of it. And then I started to dig deeper in her social media, and Gypsy, her dog, had passed away years prior to Loki's litter. So
that was the name that was on his forms, correct?
Correct. His form said Gypsy.
So let's just stop and have a conversation about this for just a second, because this is so important. This is why we have talked about making sure that the people that you buy your dogs from are AKC registered. This is why we make sure that you get to meet the mom and the dad. This is why we make sure that we do our due diligence and not support backyard breeders or puppy mills. And Lana, you did do this. You did do your research, and you looked and looked, and you found what you thought was a reputable breeder. They had a site. You got to meet the female. You were told that the male was away on active duty, and then all of these unfortunate behaviors started popping up. So you continued to do research, which is, again, very important, because when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your dog, you need to reach out to all of the places, and going straight to the breeder, right to the source, is very important. So now you know that his mother was different than the mother that was on the paperwork, because the Gypsy had passed. She was no longer alive. So she definitely couldn't be Loki's mother. And his mother was actually Trauma. So the papers are wrong. And then you found out something about the sire as well, a little bit into your research as well. Would you elaborate on that?
Basically, I don't even know if the sire existed or is even the one that's registered on his paperwork and litter. She told me when I asked her if I could have the canine handler's information to contact him, because I wanted to, speak to him and get further information about genetics. She refused. She said, "He doesn't want to have anything to do with the litter. I'm not going to give you that information." So I went back over his paperwork, and it shows that the sire is registered to her also, mother and father, on Loki's paperwork. So I don't even know who this canine handler is at this point, and who the father is, and if this canine handler even exists.
So just for the listeners here, I want you to see how easy it is to fall into a trap with these breeders and these bad situations. When breeders are not breeding dogs in a healthy manner, with the correct combinations of genetics to make happy, healthy litters, this is what happens. We've got a trainer that's saying this has happened before and that she's not going to like the outcome of where this is going. She's got a breeder who's now backpedaling and withholding information. And again, none of this is Lana's fault. She did all of the research. Everything looked good on paper. She was presented with a dog, and months later, after she filed for the registration, the paperwork is different. Again, you had no control over this. But this is why we have to be so careful. And this is why we have to really dig deep into these topics, because what happened to you should never happen to anyone. And you've been through something just incredibly traumatic. And unfortunately, we're going to get a little bit more into this because this went on for a while. You decided that you were going to put in the work and you were going to keep trying to manage the behavior. And it unfortunately did not go well. So let's start there and just continue telling the story.
So basically, the attacks continued to happen over a month's time. Couldn't get any professionals to come out or give me any kind of support or, I guess I wanted definitive answers, and you're going to get that in this type of situation. But I constantly was reaching out to people that claimed that they were professionals, and I was getting the runaround. Well, you can relinquish the dog to me for $1,500 and I'll take him off your hands. Or you can continue to work with him, but, once a dog bites, that type of behavior isn't something that can be trained out of them. And I had to, put things into perspective at that point. I mean, they were serious bites, but nothing could have prepared me for, the bites that were coming. And I had a teenager and my mom was here. And when I wasn't home, they were in the home with him. And that was always in the back of my mind. Is he going to turn on my son the way that he turned on me? Because I was his canine handler. We would go to classes. He was getting accreditations. I wanted him to get to the level where he could possibly work in a field. But I had to pull back at that time. I had to stop competitions. And I just had to daily take it upon myself to work with him because I could not get any professionals to come to my house unless I was willing to relinquish him and never see him again, or dish out a ton of money and not have any definitive results. And I just wasn't ready to let go of him at that time. I still had hope, and I guess I was being naive. I thought that somewhere a miracle would happen and it would just stop.
Let's talk about that for just a second, because I have said this before. I had a similar situation. Unfortunately, my situation was one of my dogs attacking one of my other dogs. This was my first trio of dogs. I had Cajun, Izzy, and Fiona at this point. And Izzy immediately became aggressive towards Fiona when I brought her into the household. Fiona ended up getting parvo very early on, and so I had to keep all of the dogs separated. Izzy was always fine with Cajun. There was never an issue. And then as we progressively started putting them back together again, Izzy continued to act out and be aggressive towards Fiona. And this was at the point in time I was married, and my ex-husband was very on the platform that this was his dog. He would decide when it was time and that it was fine. So I was working as a vet tech at this point, and I had a friend. His name is Ron. And unfortunately, Ron has passed. Otherwise, I would have asked him to come and be on this episode. But Ron was a bite and protection trainer that worked specifically with the Dallas police force. And Ron came over to my house, and he worked with Izzy, and we tasked her. And we taught her all kinds of routines, and we set up our lives to accommodate our dogs' lives. Izzy was kept separate from Cajun and Fiona, and we would rotate them. So when Izzy would come in the house, Cajun and Fiona would go in their kennels. Izzy would go into her kennel. Cajun and Fiona would be taken outside to go potty, and then everybody would get their one-on-one time with the family. Unfortunately, in December of 2009, I had a major brain and spinal surgery. And 3 months after I had this brain and spinal surgery in March of 2010, my ex-husband was traveling, as he did quite often for work, and there was a miscommunication between my oldest stepdaughter and I. And she let Izzy into the house when I still had Cajun and Fiona in the bedroom with me. And Izzy came barging into the bedroom and went straight for Fiona's throat. I had to repeatedly slam a door on their muzzles to break them apart while I was screaming at the girls to get into their bedrooms and shut their doors. There was blood everywhere. And finally, they let go of each other, and Izzy went immediately into her kennel, and I called the vet that I had just retired from working from, and she met me at the hospital. And I took Izzy in, or Fiona in, and she said, "Do you want me to save her, or do you want me to put her down?" And I said, "Do you think you can save her?" And she said, "I can save her." So I had her save her, which I later found out was the wrong decision to make because she was forever traumatized because of that bite history. And I went home and I got Izzy and I brought her in, and the vet said, "Do you want me to put her down?" And I said, "You have to do it, and I can't be here." And I left, and I felt awful. I cried the entire way home, and I called Ron. And mind you, you guys, this is like the middle of the night by now because I've driven back and forth. My work was like 30 minutes away from where I lived. I've got 2 kids. I've got one dog on the surgery table and we're putting the other dog down. And I called Ron and I said, "This is where we're at." And he said, "Emily, we have been working on this for over a year. You have done everything you could have done. You have gone farther than any owner I have ever worked with went, probably because of your career. And you did everything that you could do to help this dog. And I know that this is easier said than done, but you need to forgive her and you need to forgive yourself and you need to let her go." And, my ex-husband was not happy with me that I had her put down. But the point that I made to him was the point that you just made a little bit ago, was that your mom and your son were alone with Loki and you did not know when that switch was going to flip. What if Izzy had attacked one of the girls instead of Fiona? What if she had attacked me just 3 months after having major surgery? What if, she had attacked both of the dogs? I mean, it could have been worse. And we had already had several incidents and had been keeping them separated. So, we knew it was going to happen again. So it's a really, really tough decision to get to that point. And you took a long time to come to that point as well. Like you said, you were not prepared for the bites that were still to come. So I'm telling this story because I want the listeners to know that I have been here. I understand where Lana is coming from. And it is a terrible feeling to be scared in your own home and to not know what the predictability of the schedule is and what's going to set the dog off and is everybody okay. And there's just like this tense, overbearing, awful, heavy feeling when you're walking around in your own home and you can't even relax because you're so worried about what's going to happen if somebody opens the door too soon, or you try to assist Loki up onto the couch or into the car or into his kennel. So let's talk about the progression of the bites now, because it did get worse from here. It was happening every 6 weeks, and then the frequency went up. Go ahead and tell that part.
So basically, just when you think everything's subsided and you're going to make it through another 6 weeks, we're into June, almost in the beginning of June, and my son had just gotten out of school. He was, on summer break, and Loki attacked me 4 times within a 10-day period. And it was a scary, scary situation because at one point we were in the basement, and I was about ready. It was early in the morning. He had his walk. I told him to go into his crate. I was taking my son. He had a doctor's appointment. And as I approached the crate, he whipped out of the kennel and just latched onto my arm and started shredding me, and then reattached to my thigh, and he ripped my thigh wide open. And then I put my arm back in in front of him so he would reattach to my arm to let go of my thigh, because all that was going through my mind was he's going to hit an artery and I'm going to bleed out in front of my son. Eventually, he let go, he released, and I was able to barricade him and get my son up the steps. And he settled down for a time, but then he jumped over the barricade and he was circling me upstairs. And I had to make my mom and my son go up to their bedrooms. And it was basically like I was the prey and he was coming to finish me. So I had this giant box that I had just purchased because the trainer's big idea was get him another crate. The $1,200 crate that he has isn't good enough. And the wireframe crate that he has in the finished basement, he probably, feels a little isolated, even though he was never in his crate. He would only go in his crate when we would leave the house if I didn't take him. And the majority of the time he would go in the car, but then he started to act crazy in the car, so then I would have to leave him in the house. So when I reached back out and touched base with the trainer, he told me, go buy him another crate, which I did like an idiot. And now I put that upstairs in one of my living rooms. So I was able to take the crate and block it off so he couldn't go into the front of my house. And when he came up the steps from the basement, the crate was there with the door open, and I had the new box blocking the other side, and I was able to coax him into the crate. And with pot holders on my hands, I was able to shut the crate door, and as I was locking it, he violently lunged and ripped the pot holders off of my hands. Thank God he didn't get my hands this time, but I was able to get the door locked, and then I was able to barricade him in. I put some furniture in front of it so he couldn't get out. And then that's where he spent 2 days because I couldn't get any trainers to come out unless I was going to give them a fee or relinquish my dog, who I loved, to some stranger and never have any contact with ever again. Because there was the potential that if I did that, they were going to rehome him. And with my conscience, I could not risk him going to a family and harming someone else.
And this is the point that I really want to drive home. When a dog has idiopathic aggression or rage syndrome, this is not something that is curable. This is something that is going to continue to escalate just like it did in this situation. Alana did not know that Loki had idiopathic rage syndrome. He was never diagnosed with it, but everything that she's saying are classic signs, classic indicators of this idiopathic aggression. The attacks are, random, they're aggressive, they're escalating, there's blood. And you did everything. You did everything right.
And then more.
And then more. Yes, you did everything right and then more. And a couple of times you've said that you were an idiot. You were not an idiot. You just did not know what you were dealing with. How are you supposed to know that this is a thing when the dog community doesn't talk about this kind of stuff? Mm-hmm. That's why we're bringing this to light, because this happens, I guarantee, more often than people suspect it does. It's, something that happens due to bad breeding. It can happen because the dog has some kind of aneurysm. It can happen because the dog has a Chiari malformation. It can happen because their brain swells up in a certain area of their skull and causes them to have damage that now is affecting them neurologically. It can happen for a lot of reasons. And so, again, this is another situation where what you don't know, you don't know. And unfortunately, you had to learn this in a really bad way. And so now you've got him in the crate and he's in there for 2 days and you can't get any trainers to come out and help you. You've done all of this work to try to figure out what you're going to do. So is this the point where you make the decision to put him down?
I basically, I had, made a friend on social media, and she reached out to someone who's very established in the dog community. And, without hesitation, he contacted me. And we had a very serious, candid conversation. And he said, I don't know you. I've tried to reach out to people. No one will come out. This is a serious situation. And I know that you're a woman and you want to think with your heart. But right now you have to think with your head. this is not going to go away. This cannot be trained out of him. He cannot be rehomed. And you have to think about what's best for him. And he can't go on like this. And you don't want your son to grow up without you, because I can guarantee you I've been in this industry for a long time. And answer me this, the attacks are more serious and more frequent. And I said, yes. He said that the attacks basically with these types of dogs, they jump up. So it went from my wrist, my forearm, my upper arm, my back, all up my back and my arms. He goes, do you want him to bite your throat? Because I can guarantee you that's what's going to happen. And you're never going to recover from that. You have to make the decision. So I made the decision at that point after speaking with him. I didn't know him, but I trusted and I valued his professional opinion. And he's a friend now. I literally couldn't thank him enough. But after I had that conversation with him, I felt like a woman, and I felt like I was going to lose my best friend. I didn't want to take a life, and I was killing ultimately my son's best friend, and I didn't want to break his heart. So I reached out to someone who's a female canine handler, and I said, I'm thinking about having him euthanized. Can you come out and evaluate him? She dropped everything that she was doing, and she rushed over to my house, and she took one look at him, and she said, he doesn't look right. He was very agitated. He was aggressive. And then she said, let me see your bites. And I had bites all down the back of my arms, all down the back of my legs. My thigh was ripped open. Both of my hands and my one wrist was ripped clear open. And for those 10 days, I didn't go to the doctors. I was at home cleaning my wounds, because I knew if I would have went to the doctor in the state of New Jersey, they were going to call the local animal control, and my dog was going to be removed from my home. And I did not want to traumatize my son. And I didn't want my boy, who I loved, to be taken away.
Every state has different laws, and bite laws are really specific. So please, everyone, if you don't know what the bite laws in your state are, please look them up, because they are really quite terrible. It usually puts the dog in isolation for a week to 10 days. And whether or not they pass that isolation test, they can be euthanized. And there are things that sometimes happen after that we're not going to talk about on this show because they are really graphic. And it's just incredibly important that you know what your bite laws are in your state, because there's a vast difference, and they can just come and take your dog and you would never see it again due to a bite history. So at this point, you and your friend and the gentleman who sounds like your version of Ron have helped you decide that it's time to let him go, because your other option was to give him to someone that you didn't know, with the potential of rehoming him after they broke him, or just putting him down without your knowledge. Because at this point, there's a bite history, and this dog can't be a working dog anymore. This dog can't be rehabilitated and given to a handler and be put in a situation where he could potentially kill somebody out of nowhere for no reason at all. So you decided to bring someone into your home to say goodbye to Loki. Why don't you talk a little bit about why you did that and how it went?
Correct. I reached out to our veterinarian, and they said due to his, recent aggressions, he couldn't be brought in, and I really didn't want to bring him into anywhere. So they gave me a name of a hospice veterinarian that travels to your home. So that morning I called and made an appointment, and the woman, she was an angel. She was very young, very soft-spoken, and I could definitely at that point, I knew that was her calling. She was very, very knowledgeable. She researched everything. She basically said what everyone else said, that he's suffering. Mental illness is something that occurs in animals. It's not talked about. It comes out of nowhere, and there's no cure for it. And it's ultimately not a way for any animal to live. So I made the decision. I set the appointment. And she came to my home about 7 p.m. that evening. She laid everything on the table for me, and we basically gave my boy the dignity that he deserved. He went out on my terms in my house because I felt as though I didn't want to traumatize my son and he needed closure. They were extremely close and he's never experienced death, and I wanted him to be able to process it. I mean, even though he's in high school, it is something that you need to process in your own way. So at this point, we made the decision, and she gave him, some barbiturates. It was like a jelly, and it was on a hamburger. She came with the hamburgers. I wasn't allowed to give them to Loki because I had open cuts and I was bleeding. And even though I had bandages, she said I can go into cardiac arrest. So I had to have my mom feed them to him through the cage, which he took. But he was in such a state that she had to give him enough. And it took him almost 45 minutes because he was so riled up to go into a lull state. So he fell asleep. And at that point, she told me that he was in such a deep sleep, he was never going to wake up. And we were able to open the kennel and we pulled his bed out and he laid in my son's arm. And he was able to say goodbye to him and hug him. And he did this for a couple of hours because he needed to process it in his own way. And I felt that I owed it to him to be able to give him that closure and that peace of mind to know that his boy was sleeping. And even though this isn't the end result that we wanted, it was the best thing for him because he was so magnificent and he was such a good dog and we loved him. That he needed that peace to leave this earth. So at this point then, she administered the final needle and he passed peacefully in his boy's arms.
So one of the things that you had talked about was identifying that animals have mental illness. And one of the things that I really want to bring to the forefront is all bodies are weird machines that, we don't really understand. Anything that can happen in a human body, anything that can go wrong in a human body can go wrong in a dog's body. As you said, could have been an aneurysm, it could have been a multitude of different things. It could have been genetic. It could have been, we don't know. So Lana, thank you so much for your story. It's so difficult, to think about it, but I can only hope that this story helps somebody who's hiding bites right now, who's not going to the hospital, who's having to face the same thing that you did. That's my piece on it.
So earlier I mentioned an aneurysm, a Chiari malformation, and brain swelling. Just for a little fun fact for the listeners, I have a Chiari malformation. That is why I had the surgery that I had. It is something that can happen in dogs and all animals. And basically what it is it's a herniated brainstem. And when there is pressure applied on that herniated brainstem, it can cause all kinds of problems. And there's a surgical fix for it, but it's very traumatizing to the dog. So the mental health part of that also kicks in there because they've gone back and forth from, having this brain swelling to now having it fixed and then falling somewhere in between because they have this past aggression history that it's not an easy decision to make. And I'm very emotional right now, and Lana is very emotional right now, and Josh is also emotional. This is a situation where we want you to know, again, you don't need to feel shame here, okay? This is happening to people. This is very real, and it is not your fault, okay? So if this is happening to you, make sure that you have a support system. Make sure that you're reaching out, you're asking for help, and that you have family members who are actively involved in this, because getting to the saying goodbye is really difficult. It's scary. Obviously, some very big mental and emotional damage comes to us from this. And then saying goodbye right after and having to deal with the loss on top of it is a lot. So you guys were in the process of, as part of another solution here, you guys were in the process of bringing in another dog because you thought that potentially having, him have a friend, him have a buddy or whatever could potentially curb the behavior. But Aries, who you now have, the whole situation got all messed up and he got delayed. And fortunately, he did not arrive when he was supposed to, because that could have been a totally different bad situation. But Aries did end up coming at the right time because he was there after Loki passed when you guys needed him. And I'm going to have you come back and I'm going to have you talk about Aries' story because you had a very unique situation with him getting transported to you that unfortunately we don't have time to get into tonight. But what I would like to do is again say thank you, Lana. And I am so sorry that this happened to you.
I appreciate it. Just wanted to bring some awareness because, you know, the shame and the guilt does play a big factor, and it's something that takes a long time to get over, and it still bothers me because I feel like I took a life.
You know, like I said, my incident with putting Izzy happened in March of 2010. It is currently January of 2024, and it still bothers me. It still upsets me. I still get emotional about it. So please know that I am always here for you and that we can always talk about this, even if you just need to vent or memorialize him in whatever way you need. And I want anybody out there who's listening that hears this and is dealing with this, if you don't have a support system, if you need someone to talk to, Lana and I are here for you. And we absolutely 100% do not want you to be afraid or be ashamed to reach out to either of us. We'll share Lana's socials information. You guys will be able to see some videos of Loki, and you'll be able to see some amazing videos of Aries and how wonderful he is. Lana, is there anything else that you'd like to say in closing?
Just don't be ashamed, and you have to go with your gut. Unfortunately, it's not the outcome. It's not the fairy tale that you want. But sometimes you have to make those decisions before it affects you in a way that you can't recover from. But you shouldn't feel guilty about it. And I learned that after speaking with you. It definitely takes time.
It does, and I'm really glad that we can be here for each other. And I'm going to call that for this episode of Straight Up Dog Talk, and we will have a much happier episode next week.
Straight Up Dog Talk was created by Emily Breslin. It is edited, produced, and co-hosted by Josh Wasta under the supervision of Straight Up Dog Talk, LLC, and Emily Breslin. If you're enjoying this podcast, follow or subscribe to be sure you don't miss an episode, and leave us a review on your favorite platform. Looking for more honest and relatable dog content? Check out our sister show, Unpacked, with Jerry Sheriff and Madison Simpson. Thanks for listening to Straight Up Dog Talk. See you next week.